Cloud. Hello, I'm Bhaskar Chakravorti, Dean of Global Business at the Fletcher School, and I have the great pleasure of being on screen with a dear friend and a tremendous alum of the Fletcher School, Olaf Groth, who is, I believe you're on the West Coast and perhaps in the vicinity of Berkeley, California. Is that right, Olaf?
Yeah, it's great to be with you, Bhaskar. And in fact, I am in Berkeley, California, back from about 2 weeks of travel in China. So I'm very glad to have this conversation while the sun is shining outside.
Absolutely. Well, it's a good time to exchange news about the sun being shining because it's shining at your end and it's shining here in Boston as well. I speak from a very hot Boston today, and I know that heat and the change of weather and climate is one of many issues that you, Olaf, have taken on as some of the defining issues of our time. And another issue, of course, is China, from where you've just recently returned. So there are so many topics I'd like to jam into this conversation that I'm sure we're going to run out of time and not do justice to the many issues, Olaf, that you've been working on and writing on. And most specifically, I want to talk about the ideas in your latest book, which is the Great Remobilization. And it is such an intriguing book, and it covers, such a broad expanse of issues that once again we will not do justice to the topics, the problems, the opportunities, and the solutions that you and your co-authors have spoken about in the book. But hopefully we shall, whet the appetite for people who are watching this and listening to it, that they will run out to get the book and read, all of it. So let me just sort of touch on, two things as my opening question. And then, we'll have a conversation based on that. One is, tell us a little bit about this book. What, got you to write the book, and if you could summarize some of the key ideas that you have in there. Second is, since the book has come out, a lot has happened. We live in a world where, the news keeps tumbling out even as we have conversations like this. And since the book was published, I'm curious about, how your own thinking and the reaction to the ideas, has evolved. And how has your recent visit to China, where you were for the World Economic Forum meetings, what kind of a reaction did you have to the conversations that you engaged in China? So let's first talk about the book, and then we'll come to your recent visit to China.
Three big questions, Bhaskar, and I think we need probably 3 hours at John Harvard's, right, to do them all justice over a good pint or two. The Great Remobilization is what we will call a big think book, right? And it really, in a way, it's an ode to Fletcher and my conditioning at Fletcher, in that it tackles the structural changes that we're seeing in the global economy, and it seeks to explain them, right? Clearly, what we saw during the pandemic is immense pressure exerted on the global economy, on really what we had come used to, which was a system of systems that very much rested on an Anglo-American notion of the Bretton Woods system of ever liberalizing trade and investment relationships, and a convergence on that free trade, free investment, free movement of people paradigm that really Anglo-Americans of the 1980s, 1990s, which were my formative years during and right after my Fletcher education in the 90s, held dearly, right? That was the ideal, and we called it Global 1.0. And during the pandemic, we saw that Global 1.0 system of systems under tremendous pressure, and really exposing the cracks in the system. It wasn't that all of a sudden there was this cataclysmic event that would undo Global 1.0, but I think the pandemic led us to see the phenomena more clearly as to why it is no longer a helpful notion and no longer a shared vision amongst many decision makers and populations around the world, right? So we of course saw the halting of trade relations at some point because of issues with global supply chains, customs forms not being able to be stamped, simple things like that because people were afraid of viruses. The faltering of global governance of the virus and the mitigation measures, and so on and so forth. And of course, the continued role of what one might call strong man, strong woman politics that was geared toward allaying citizens' concerns about all of these pressures, all of these pains people were feeling all over the world. And so as we were looking at our students, because all of us who are authors in the book are professors, of course, but we're also senior level trusted advisors, we felt we needed to help both those constituencies make sense of it. And so we unpacked what was happening into 5 tectonic forces. And those tectonic forces that are shifting and chafing off each other are, of course, first and foremost, COVID and CRISPR, the genetic engineering technology, as sort of the thing that ignited it all. But of course, had been going on for a while. Then cognitive technologies such as artificial intelligence, data science, but also things like brain-computer interfaces that are starting to change how we make decisions, how we act and transact in economies. The next C then was crypto and Web3 blockchain type technologies that are really intended as a governance revolution and less so as a purely tech revolution. Next then was cyber to secure it all. And then, of course, the final 2, climate change. We just discussed this casually as the existential threat to all of humanity that is shared. And China, because you can't really think about any of that anymore without thinking about China's expanding role in the world, without necessarily being too linear about it. China has some significant issues, as do we, but it is here to stay. And Global 2.0 can't be shaped without thinking about China. So those were, I think in the book, we call them 5 C's, but we actually, meanwhile, have evolved them into these 6 C's, right? Now they come together and they form a new operating logic called the cognitive economy, in which essentially significant actors in the economy, whether it's governments or large corporations, are using cognitive technology in order to make sense of this very complex, overpressurized system of systems, control flows, control movements, control where the fragility is, and then either fix it or exacerbate it, right? And that control, injecting that cybernetics function for control, will yield extraordinary power to those who design, own, and capitalize those technologies, right? And so that's what we saw. And in order to make sense of it all for your organization, we developed a leadership framework called FLP-IT, with a framework around the leadership that goes with the strategic thinking on FLP-IT, that is called the Design Activist Leader. That's really what the book culminates in.
Okay, well, as promised, this is a sweeping landscape, both in terms of the tectonic forces and the solution or the approach to these tectonic forces through FLP-IT. And FLP-IT, just to kind of elaborate on the different elements, are forces, logic, phenomena, impact, and triage. So there's a lot to unpack, in that solution element itself. And it's interesting that you are addressing, multiple audiences. You are the CEO of Cambrian Futures, and you're also a professor at University of California at Berkeley, where you interact with students, researchers, and others. And so I'm curious about how, say, a current decision maker or leader, or an aspiring decision maker or leader. So in the latter category would be students, and in the former category would be executives in organizations, public sector, private sector, social sector, and so on. How would you give them in a few minutes a way to navigate this entire territory, where you have 6 C's that define multiple tectonic shifts, and then the FLP-IT framework? Where would you begin?
Yeah, it's a great question, Bhaskar. And so we've actually designed a course called Global Strategy 2.0 around this new book, in which we're teaching students and executives in executive education on how to make sense of this new Global 2.0 paradigm, right? So we use the FLP-IT framework to say, look, what we're describing in the book is, very macro level. We're describing Global 2.0 as with the engine of the cognitive economy, how it works on a very high level. Now, we understand, of course, that not every one of you is chartered with, helping to design the shape of the global economy per se. You have to be concerned with making a difference for your customers, your stakeholders, in your domain, in your industry, if you're an executive, in your country, as it were. And so as such, you need to now bring down the cognitive economy and the FLP-IT model to your domain and say, okay, what impact are these forces having on my domain, my geography, my industry? And what phenomena do I see arising? And how do I preemptively position against that? The FLP-IT framework is really a scenario planning derived methodology that allows you to exercise foresight on how this new economy is going to evolve for you in your particular domain, right? So we're helping decision makers, we're helping students think about their domain, whatever it may be. It could be retail, it could be hospitality, it could be manufacturing, could be anything, it could be economic development or diplomacy, right? What does this new picture mean for you with all of its forces? And you might add some additional forces into it that play out on your domain level. And then let's be methodical about colliding those, right? To see the new operating logic, to see phenomena in your industry, your domain, and to say, okay, we're looking at that sort of on a 5-7 year horizon. How do I now bring it back by assessing implications and by designing an adjustment in your strategic portfolio, right? So that could be a portfolio of investments, that could be a portfolio of actions, it could be your portfolio of products. How do you change that based on the implications that you see for your domain? So it's essentially a 5-step process that you can do back of the envelope if you want it. And you, of course, can make it a multi-month exercise as well if you want it to be formal and all-encompassing about it. But there is a method to that madness, and it's not rocket science. And we guide you right through that in a step-by-step fashion, so that at the other end, you have literally flipped chaos into opportunity, and the opportunity is presented as a coherent portfolio that is different from the portfolio you had so far, right? You need to make changes to your existing portfolio to be adaptive to the changing circumstances, right? And you and I have been, bulge bracket consultant firm leaders, right? You know that the hardest thing to do is to decide what no longer to do as part of your strategy. And so we teach you how to do that and come up with a more robust and resilient portfolio at the end of the day.
Very interesting. So, if I could, drill a little bit into that, and take a specific example, just to kind of fix ideas. And here I'm going to reflect on some of the issues that I've been engaging with, and our team at Fletcher. Apologize for this. A team at Fletcher Digital Planet has been spending a lot of time on as well, in terms of trying to understand one of the many trends associated with digital technologies, and perhaps the one that is on everyone's mind, is artificial intelligence, and the degree to which it is going to permeate, everything we do. and decisions we make as leaders and participants in complex organizations. And one of the issues that I worry about in particular in terms of artificial intelligence is that there is, no matter how far we advance in terms of the capacity of the foundational models in artificial intelligence, which, is in one of your C's, and also sort of makes its way to some of these others as well, because of its radiating influences. No matter how good we get in advancing towards artificial general intelligence, even if we never actually get there, there is still going to be a trust gap for a variety of reasons. And so as a leader, and I'm constantly facing pressure to incorporate this exciting new technology and potentially an intriguing and a high value technology into my business operations. How do I make that decision? So again, to kind of narrow this even further, say I'm running a massive hospital system, and one way in which I make my hospital, more efficient, more productive, and save lives is by using an algorithmic decision-making tool that does triage, to use one of your terms in Flip It, it does triage on patients who need different kinds of care and send them in different directions. And, of course, you have hospital staff and clinicians and so on, but they are overwhelmed. So I turn to the algorithm to help me do that. Unfortunately, I don't completely trust the algorithm because I'm not sure that this thing completely understands the context. So I'm just using that as one example of a leader or a manager of an organization that has to make a choice relating to one of the tectonic shifts. And how does one now apply your Flip It framework? And I hope it's this is a manageable enough problem for us to talk about, on screen.
Oh, I'm confident it is. Look, you hit on one extremely important theme in our book as well, and that is receding trust. And we're seeing this in the Edelman Trust Barometer. We're seeing this everywhere. The reason for why we have, the strongman politics, as it were, so dominant these days is because people have given up on trust. We are no longer, to put it in Deng Xiaoping's words, hunting mice, as it were, for people as leaders, or at least that's the perception. And so we have to make sure that whatever we do as part of the triage rebuilds the trust. And that is trust writ large on a macro level as government policymakers, or on a micro level with my patients, as you're hinting at. So trust is the most important currency in human life, in the economy and political systems. You can almost, with the exception of time, maybe make more of almost everything, but trust is very hard to regain. So what does this mean within the Flip It framework? So as you're thinking about, having seen a new operating logic, let's just say it's this cognitive economy thing in the biomedical realm, in your industry of hospitals and human medical care, you need to then say, okay, how are things shifting? What are the phenomena I'm seeing in terms of both which organizations in my care ecosystem are well positioned in order to leverage artificial intelligence in its various forms? How will the ecosystem be changing? Part of that ecosystem is the group of stakeholders, right? Of course, whether that is insurances or whether that is patients and their loved ones. How are they going to be dealing with the cognitive economy in my industry, with AI at play every day? And how do I need to involve them? That is how you rebuild trust. Building trust doesn't mean you have to be perfect. It doesn't mean everything you do with AI will always have to be ideal and spot on. Everybody understands that when you're experimenting with new tools, sometimes experiments will fail, but you need to pre-discuss that. You need to discuss with your stakeholders, especially with your patients. Look, we're using these tools. We think we'll see X amount of improvement on, let's say, false positive, false negative, on speed, whatever it may be. And that's been proven out in X amount of experiments. But just so you know, we're not at a mature stage yet with these technologies. Here are the risks. Here's how we're designing this experiment. How do you feel about this? What are your thoughts on this? Is there a way to do this better, right? And look, this is not entirely new to the healthcare sector. Pharmaceutical companies have always dealt with, patient feedback and user groups, and how do you make the efficacy better? How do you make the communication better on the part of medical providers around medications? So it's not entirely new, but now that we are using AI to get into our heads and into patients' heads and their bodies deeper and deeper, impacting their genetic makeup, impacting their psychology, we have to be that much more explicit and thorough and expansive with governance. So part of your new portfolio in this cognitive economy for healthcare needs to be that you have discrete governance programs. And in fact, we've designed some, right, that go from the most senior level of hospital management and the board down to the chief the chiefs in the various medical departments, down to frankly every nurse, every technician, to ensure that we understand how to talk about AI and how to keep us honest on certain values and principles we set top down. Then we need to get down to the next level and next level below that, and that is auditing the algorithms, having data logs to make sure the data aren't biased for or against certain ethnic groups, for instance, which is what has happened, and that we have outside experts validating those processes and the outcomes, and that we're transparent about communicating all of those things, right? And then lastly, we have to make sure that we test these applications, these AI applications in stakeholder systems to see where the fragility in the stakeholder system is. And we don't actually have to do that and play it on a patient. We can actually run simulations. We can do red teaming. We can do all kinds of things to get ahead of this thing and to prove to our patients that we're doing everything we can to keep them safe. That will regenerate trust.
Yeah, fascinating. And I think it's also kind of interesting kind of talking about this in the context of an industry as critical and as complex as healthcare. Of course, you're dealing with life and death, and one that's highly regulated, and one that is reliant on technology, but at the same time hesitates to adopt technology because there's so many stakeholders involved, and all the critical stakeholders need to be on board. Otherwise, even the one weak link or one hesitant link can, disrupt the entire chain. So let's pivot for a bit. And speaking of stakeholders, as you have been talking about these ideas in a variety of fora, you've just returned from the World Economic Forum meetings in China. One of the greatest places to meet a wide cross-section of stakeholders from industry, from government, from various policy sectors, and so on. What are some of the tectonic shifts that you're hearing as you travel there? And it's interesting that one of the tectonic shifts you note is China, and the meeting was in China. So I'm assuming there's a sort of an interesting way to just get a little bit of an on-the-ground sampling of what it might look like, at least in one part of China that you might have visited. So I'm curious about how the tectonic shifts, the narrative around it, might have evolved. Are there some that are rising higher, in people's consciousness and awareness? And also, how are people thinking about the solution elements and your own ideas around the Flip-It framework? Is that evolving as well as you kind of do the rounds?
Yeah, so I would have been privileged to be able to teach and research in China about once a year for the past 15 years, minus 2 years or so during the pandemic. And I always appreciate an opportunity to get to quote unquote ground truth, right? Especially as geopolitics heats up, and the perceptions of each other harden thanks to political messages. And so, yes, I was at the World Economic Forum's annual meeting of the new champions, which is sort of that summer Davos. And it's, I would say, it's certainly more Asia focused. It is more entrepreneurship focused, more technology centric, and a bit younger on average than the original Davos in Europe. And so what you're getting is a slightly different crowd of people. You're getting, of course, different mindsets. You're hearing Asians comment on affairs globally and in Asia, including China. So it's a much more mixed and I would say balanced picture that you emerge with. And I will say it's not uncritical of China at all. Because the dialogue is, in fact, quite open. And so you do get in these one-on-ones, you do get a good impression of what people are thinking. Of course, there are red lines that they won't step over. That's clear. But it is a fairly good emerging picture that you're getting when you're there. So what does that mean? China is changing, just like the United States is changing. In fact, the evolved view is that in the book we say, look, the United States and China are both at a pivotal moment in their evolution. Both are in a very difficult situation internally, as well as with regard to their global postures. And it's a very dicey, delicate picture. Both are searching for a new lease on life, as it were, in terms of their own identities, about the roles that they play, about how to provide for their people. So it's actually, from that angle, it's a fairly similar situation. But coming back to China particularly, Xi Jinping has, I think, overpressurized China over the past 4 years or so since the pandemic hit, and has not just cranked down on the virus, which has caused a lot of hardship, not just to the economy, but to people's personal lives. And of course, as the economy slowed down, people who then so got pressurized are now coming out and saying, we want to have a greater say in this next phase. And so since we can't and shouldn't expect an opening of China per se, in terms of a Western notion of liberalization, we are seeing, I think, some signals that a bit of opening and a bit of focus on global reintegration into the global economy, giving people a bit more of a say, greater domestic competition, for instance, is actually on the agenda of the third plenum coming up, which is sort of traditionally where large changes are being announced. So that should be happening within another 2 or 3 days, I believe. So monitor that closely to see where China is going. The message we got at the AMNC from Li Qiang, who is the premier, was unequivocally inviting on an economic and business level. He was very, very specific, much more specific than he was last year on the need to have global dialogue around artificial intelligence, to take a very very discrete look at how business models for industries are changing within China, what that means for implications in China. He was able to here and there touch on fairly advanced notions of different technologies. So it showed to us, or the message was sent to us, that he is very much able to look at a bird's eye view, but also helicopter down into the weeds and understand that he needs to do that in order to hopefully reform the economy. But we'll see what that means. It won't mean anything like our Western notions, but it could mean something very different from where it is now. China's economy is still troubled. It needs to get to higher ground on growth. 5% isn't enough, and so hopefully they'll turn this thing around. So it's a wobbly situation for China, just like there's a wobbly situation in the United States and in Europe for slightly different reasons.
Yeah. So wobbly situation for China, and as you note, wobbly situation elsewhere as well. And I'm wondering, just as a way to test your framework, when we talk about tectonic shifts, uh, the reason why you picked these were, to some extent, you see them as the most significant variables in the kind of the global equation that we are trying to solve for. And I'm wondering, we are right now, July 2024, and at this moment in time, one of the biggest variables that one also sees is the United States wobbliness. And the wobbliness of the United States, regardless of what happens in November, the current situation in July 2024 in the United States is a very large variable that's playing out. Now, I know that that doesn't quite go with the C, alliteration of your tectonic shifts. But I'm curious about what you think about the geopolitical significance of the United States as we look ahead, as part of the global uncertainty that you are a student of.
Yeah. Yeah, look, whereas China is wobbly on the economic front and demographics, the United States is clearly wobbly on the political front. I think no matter who is in power, whether it's Biden or Trump, in the fall, we are going to see a continued tough stance on China. I do believe that there will be a marked difference in that stance, though, because President Biden is, I think, more positively predisposed to the allies of the United States and more predisposed to playing in concert, even though, of course, and make no mistake about it, the U.S. is the dominant force, whereas Mr. Trump less so. And that, I think, leaves more room for creative maneuvering if it were a Biden administration than as if it were a Trump administration. I'm not predicting more or less likelihood of success here. I'm just saying it's a different America that China will have to cope with, even if it's only in nuances. The nuances very much matter. We have seen a very slight, ever so slight rapprochement that came out in our conversations in China as well between the US and China in terms of fewer incidents that bubbled up to global attention, right? Like the balloons over the United States were, et cetera, et cetera. And some pundits were ascribing that to the meeting that Biden had with Xi here in San Francisco, and that at least the foundations for conversations, for dialogue were laid, not necessarily laying out positions, but saying it's very important both sides agree to avoid misunderstanding, which could become a cataclysm over things like Taiwan, for instance, and to have a functional dialogues, let's say, on the future of artificial intelligence. So now we have a joint commission that will look at that and that will tackle problems of governance and regulation and safety and security that are in everybody's interest, no matter where you are. Of course, there will be no-go areas like military use of artificial intelligence, but maybe there'll be some safeguards there as well. One can only hope. But I guess really the main thrust is dialogue right now. Let's hope we can keep that up. We've seen even the top generals on both sides now talking to each other again, which wasn't a given over the last 3 years or so. So right now there is a moment of hope, a small crack in the door, as it were. Let's hope that no matter how November pans out, we can keep that open.
Absolutely. So a small crack in the door to address the many cracks that you have identified in your book, The Great Remobilization, Olaf. And I love, any conversation with Fletcher alum because we weave in and out of so many different ideas and topics and problems, and most importantly, solutions to the problems, whether they're geopolitical or technological or healthcare related or business and everything else in between. So in closing, I would ask you a question that is often on the minds of a lot of current students at Fletcher, which is how did your time at the Fletcher School influence your own worldview and your mindset and your journey, which has been fascinating and will continue to be fascinating by the looks of it.
I will tell you that when people describe when people describe the essence of me, or when I describe my own essence for that matter, I see myself as an explorer and a dot connector. And Fletcher gave me the skill set, and I think the rhythm, sort of the pattern of interaction that allows you to discover the different dots around the globe, how they connect, how people live their lives on the ground, but how policymakers think on a high level, to connect those, to helicopter between the different levels and then connect them over to similar insights in other countries. And I think that is a skill set, to see that those connections between the dots, to make sense of those connections, that frankly only Fletcher is able to give, and maybe other APSIA schools as well. But that kind of globalist perspective on the dots, as it were, was very important. And I think the second thing is to always look for the solutions in between, right? So where is as we just said, where is the door just a crack wide open that you can put a hand through, or put a gaze through, and see, is there something I can glean on the other side that will help me with a solution that opens the door a little bit further, right? And that's the second thing, right? The constant dialogue with people from all over the world, from very different walks of life, remaining open to those cracks. And then thirdly, seeing, and we described this in the book, is what I would call zeroth principle thinking, right? ZPT. And that means don't rely on yesteryear's building blocks and on the rules that have existed, for the past 20, 30, 40 years. Always look for innovation on those rules, because right now, when many people are calling these rules into question, we need to innovate on these rules. So find new building blocks, find new logics, right? Don't just go to first principles, go to zeroth principles, right? Invent these building blocks with others across cultures and make them work for all sides. That is immensely uncertainty evoking, right? And anxiety evoking for many people. But I think Fletcher writes in particular are well equipped to handle that and to lead people through it.
Well, wonderful. I love kind of closing on that, on ZPT. Yet another thing that we learned from this fascinating discussion. The 6 Cs as the tectonic plates, the flip it framework to, kind of flip the uncertainty into choice, and the zeroth principle. So I think once again, these last 45 minutes have been a classic example of the fact that you could get very friendly with Jeff Bezos and get into a rocket and then see the Earth, in its totality from a distance, or you could come and spend some time at the Fletcher School and see the Earth and the many aspects of it, all at one time. So, Olaf, thank you so much. It's been a privilege chatting with you, and we look forward to seeing you back at Fletcher sometime really soon.
Always a privilege and a great conversation, and I hope so as well, Bhaskar. Thank you for the opportunity.
Absolutely. Good to see you.
All right. Bye-bye.